And we are live. Yes, you are not seeing double for today. I did post a video earlier today with my interview with Carl McHale, but I am going to start doing these live broadcasts if you guys are interested in them. Basically, what we're going to do, we're going to go through the news for the day, whether they be geopolitical, finance related, and sometimes intertwined. So let me know in the chat, at the end of this video, whether you like this format. And we may start doing more of these nightly news shows or daily news shows, whatever piques your interest. But I guess first thing is first. If you can hear me, give me a 1 in the chat. If you can hear me, give me a 0 in the chat. If you can't hear me, this is my first live stream in quite some time, so I need to kind of get back into the swing of things. But the title for today's episode is the ending of the Ukraine war. But at the same time, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, is threatening British troops into Ukraine. Is he trying to throw a monkey wrench into the ending of the war? Lots of things happened today. We did have this big meeting with Marco Rubio and the Foreign Minister of Russia, Lavrov, in Saudi Arabia. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and kick things off. Let's look at our first news item here, and let's see if I can present this to you guys. Okay, so Rubio arrives in Saudi Arabia before Russia talks to end the Ukraine war. And so this is basically not a meeting to negotiate an end to the Ukraine war, but this is basically a meeting to negotiate the terms of the meeting that's supposed to happen between Trump and Putin to negotiate the Ukraine war. Make sense? So that meeting between Trump and Putin will be what brings about a negotiated settlement in terms of what happens to the war in Ukraine. And so let's go ahead and see what Reuters has to say here. The summary, the gist of it is Trump officials met with the Russians. It's supposed to happen on Tuesday, so it's actually tomorrow. Rubio says coming weeks and days will determine if Putin is serious about peace. Trump's Gaza plan is also on the agenda in Riyadh. So this is very interesting. I've heard a few thoughts about this. I'll run it through you guys. I'll see what you guys have to say. There might be a connection here between what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Ukraine. So let's go through the article first. So it says here, Russia said Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will hold talks with top U.S. officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Tuesday, that will focus on ending the war in Ukraine and restoring the whole complex of Russia-U.S. ties. Now, Rubio arrived in Saudi's capital, Riyadh, on Monday on a previously planned trip. U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, who are set to arrive on Monday, will be joining him at the talks with the Russians. So the talks will be among the first high-level in-person discussions in years between Russia and the U.S. Officials and are meant to precede a meeting between the U.S. and Russian presidents. So this is the meeting, as we alluded to before, that will kind of set the terms for that larger meeting between Trump and Putin. And apologies for getting this wrong. It happens tomorrow. It hasn't happened yet today. So Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that Lavrov and Yuri Ushakov, a foreign policy advisor to President Putin, would fly to the Saudi capital in Riyadh on Monday. They are expected to hold a meeting with their American counterparts on Tuesday, which will focus primarily on restoring the entire complex of Russian-American relations, Peskov said. It will also be devoted to the preparation of possible negotiations on the Ukraine settlement and the organization of a meeting between the two presidents. Now, if you're anti-war, if you've been against this war, this is great news. This is the first sign of progress that we've seen towards ending the Ukraine war, which has taken the lives of over 1 million Ukrainian soldiers and no one, who knows how many Russian soldiers. The numbers may be opaque, but it's definitely in the millions, depending on the figures that you look at. And yeah, this is the first encounter between the US and Russia on ending this war. Now, what's interesting, think about this. The US is a party and Russia is a party in ending the Ukraine war. Who is missing in this equation? Well, actually, Ukraine, or actually Zelensky, was not invited to this meeting. And so what does that tell you? Putin, if you recall, 2 or 3 weeks ago, he made comments on Russian state TV that said that now that Trump is in office, the Europeans will have to bow down to the master. Effectively saying that he is not interested in negotiating with the UK or France or Germany. His only interest is to negotiate with the US. So ask yourself the question: who has been behind and who has been the primary stakeholder of this war for the last 3+ years? It's been the US. If neither of those countries, the UK or France or Russia, not Russia, or Ukraine, are not a party to this negotiation, that implies that they're simply puppets, that they were simply going along for the ride. And the only real player that matters in negotiations is the United States. So let's go ahead and continue. Peskov declined to comment on a Reuters report that Kirill Dmitriev, Russia's sovereign wealth fund chief, would also meet the U.S. delegation. Peskov declined to comment when asked if Putin and U.S. President Donald Trump would meet face-to-face in Saudi Arabia later this month. Again, they're kind of setting the stage. They're negotiating the terms of that meeting today. Let me know in the comment section if you believe that we will see a meeting between Trump and Putin. Give me a 1 in the chat. If you think otherwise, give me a 2. So a 1 in the chat if you think we are going to see this meeting between Trump and Putin. A 2 otherwise. Yeah, 2 in the event that the UK or the Europeans or some European entity throws a wrench into this ordeal. All right, so U.S. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce confirmed that Rubio, Waltz, and Witkoff will meet with the Russian delegation in Riyadh on Tuesday. The talks come after Trump last week spoke to Russian President Vladimir Putin by phone and ordered top officials to begin negotiations on the war, which he repeatedly vowed to end during his presidential campaign. It's very interesting because if you remember Trump's early Truth Social post about a week after his inauguration was very hawkish on Russia. It effectively said things along the lines of, Russia better come to the table or else we're going to slap more sanctions, more tariffs, basically saying in common man speak that we don't want to hurt you guys. And if you guys don't want us to hurt you, then come to the table and make a deal. Really antagonistic, really inflammatory to someone like Putin. But Putin kind of played it off. He played into Trump's, let's call it, ego. And we are seeing this further into talk. And this is kind of like this art of the deal. It's cliche. Everyone kind of understands Trump and how he approaches his deals and his opening offer. I think that's fairly common knowledge by now, but it still catches a lot of people off guard. So Riyadh, which is also involved in talks with Washington. Okay, so this is where it gets into the Gaza Strip. So Riyadh, which is also involved in talks with Washington over the future of the Gaza Strip, has played a role in early contacts between the Trump administration and Moscow, helping to secure a prisoner swap last week. And this is what me and Tom Luongo were talking about in our interview last week. And Trump basically sent one of our biggest planes out there to initiates this prisoner swap. And by reading the tea leaves, this is kind of like Trump's way of showing respect to the Russians, i.e., here's my biggest plane. I respect you enough to send out a Boeing 747 or whatever it was over there to Russia. It wasn't just about the prisoner swap. It was about signaling the first step or the first few steps in this multi-step process to find a way out of this Ukraine war. So U.S. top diplomat Rubio, who spoke by phone with his Russian counterpart, Foreign Minister Lavrov, on Saturday, said on Sunday that the coming weeks and days would determine whether Putin is serious about making peace. Ukrainian President Zelensky is also in the region, as what we alluded to just prior. Zelensky, who arrived in the UAE on Sunday, said he is also intended to visit Saudi Arabia and Turkey, but no dates were set. He said he had no plans to meet Russian or U.S. officials, and Ukraine is not believed to be invited into the Saudi-hosted talks. So you effectively have the two adults negotiating a settlement on what to do with the spoiled child, metaphorically speaking. So this again tells you that Ukraine was not a sovereign entity in pushing this war along. Gone are the days when Zelensky could come and speak at the U.S. Congress and guilt trip U.S. politicians and congressmen to enable more funding by the way of billions of dollars. Those days are over. Zelensky wasn't even invited to attend these talks, which is really big. Okay, so now we're going to get into the Gaza talks. On the agenda for Rubio's meeting with MBS is likely to be Trump's proposal for the Palestinian residents of Gaza to be resettled in other Arab countries, and for the U.S. to lead reconstruction of their home. That proposal has infuriated the Arab world and heightened fears among Palestinians in Gaza of being driven out of the coastal strip. Gaza has been devastated by the war that broke out when Iran-backed militia Hamas attacked southern Israel on October 7, killing about 1,200 people, taking 250 hostages. According to Israeli tallies, the offensive Israel launched in response killed more than 48,000 Palestinians, according to Gaza health authorities, before an agreement was reached last month that brought about a fragile ceasefire. Now, the reason why I find this interesting, why they're kind of adding in the Gaza peace talks along with the Ukraine peace talks, and I can't take credit for it. I heard this on a separate podcast, but this is certainly an idea that's making its ways around the internet, around the geopolitical sphere, and it is with Ukraine being the way it is, and in no way am I endorsing this, by the way. I'm trying to maintain a neutral perspective. This is not my idea. I'm not endorsing. I'm just telling you what I've heard and what I think possibly could be planned. And that is, could Trump be planning on relocating the Palestinians in Gaza into Ukraine, which has lost over 1 million plus civilians in the war? I'm just putting that out there. That's what I've heard. I'm not endorsing it. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but I'm just putting it out there. Let me know in the chat what you guys think. But I just find it extremely odd and interesting that the two topics would be brought up simultaneously. Is this reading too much into it? Is there signal here? Is this just noise? Let me know in the chat. Really interested to get your take. And I will be looking through your questions and super chats if you guys drop any at the end of this monologue here. So if you have any questions or comments, just drop them in the chat. I will read them at the end of the show. So that's basically what happened today, or what's happening tomorrow on Tuesday regarding the peace talks. Let's go ahead and move over to our next item. So this is a tweet from Lord Bibo. This is an excerpt from Lavrov. I believe this was today. So let's go ahead and play it.
Каждый должен отвечать за свои поступки. И когда кто-то долгие годы творит беззаконие, нарушает свои собственные продекларированные когда-то правила равноправия, честной конкуренции, презумпции невиновности, неприкосновенности собственности, свободы выражения мнений, обеспечения свободы доступа к информации, когда все это растаптывается без зазрения совести, когда грабится чужое в нарушение всех норм международного права, когда поощряется нацистский режим, и когда такой нацистский режим накачивается вооружениями для того, чтобы убивать своих собственных граждан, и это все делается в расчете на то, что как-нибудь проскочим и отсидимся под ядерным зонтиком, так уже не будет. И за свои деяния надо отвечать.
Yeah, so this was basically just Lavrov telling the U.S. that we're not going to take any more lawlessness, and basically setting the stage that we are negotiating with you this time around, even though we said before that we were done with the United States. We were done negotiating with the United States. There was a time before the start of the Ukraine war where in it's like 2021, even the very early January 2022, before the Ukraine war, where Russia still called the United States their partners, our partners, the U.S., our Western partners. Let's try and find an agreement. And then after the Ukraine war, that's effectively been tossed aside. Russia no longer calls the U.S. their partner. They no longer call the Europeans their partners. And so what's happening today, you can't not underscore the significance of this meeting, because no one thought that there could ever be reconciliation between the two, especially after all the sanctions, after all of the funding to Ukraine over the years, over the hundreds of thousands of dead Russian soldiers and so forth. And so this is where we're heading, guys. I mean, we're heading towards either a settlement or if we can't reach a settlement with Trump, I mean, it's not looking good for humanity as a whole. So let me know in the chat. Do you think we will see a settlement to the end of this Ukraine war? And here's another tea leaf. It says here, Visa and MasterCard payment systems may soon resume operations in Russia. And if you also recall, we have been seeing the Moscow Stock Exchange soar up, surge higher. And a lot of you guys who may have bought into, Russian stocks, especially before or during the start of the Ukraine war, when they plummeted to pennies on the dollar, metaphorically, just, scooping these things up just because they were bargain bin prices. Those stocks have been frozen for about 3 years now. That stock exchange is rising because there's speculation that those funds, those stocks might become unfrozen in the West. Now you have news like this. Visa and MasterCard payment may soon resume operations in Russia. So let's read the tea leaves here. It seems all positive. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. This is a very sad turn of events here. So it says, Munich Security Conference chairman starts crying over J.D. Vance's speech. So it is over. It does appear to be over. Let's go ahead and watch this. This is kind of, I kind of get disgusted watching this as a guy. But this says, a chairman of the Munich Security Conference literally broke down in tears over J.D. Vance's speech on Friday, criticizing Europe's leaders. Europe is currently being governed by extremely unstable and unserious people. Okay, let's watch it.
After the speech of Vice President Vance on Friday, we have to fear that our common value base is not that common anymore. I'm very grateful to all those European politicians that spoke out and reaffirmed the values and principles that they are defending. No one did this better than President Zelensky. Let me conclude, and this becomes difficult.
Okay, that's enough of that. But this basically spells the end of the post-World War II order. The U.S. under Trump is basically disengaging from Europe and essentially NATO. And you can see it. The old globalist order that so many people have talked about and written about all of these decades, the World Economic Forum, it's done. It's done. And these guys are basically admitting defeat. I mean, crying over Zelensky. All right, so this is where it gets really interesting. We alluded to this at the start of the show, and it says Starmer says U.S. backstop needed for a Ukraine peace deal. This is from the BBC. Let's see what they got to say. Keir Starmer has said any Ukraine peace deal would require a U.S. backstop to deter Russia from attacking its neighbor again. Speaking after a hastily convened meeting with the European leaders in Paris, the Prime Minister repeated that he would consider deploying UK troops to Ukraine in the event of a lasting peace agreement. But he said a U.S. security guarantee was the only way to effectively deter Russia, and vowed to discuss the key elements of a peace deal with U.S. President Donald Trump when the pair meet in Washington next week. Now, let me ask you guys a question. Give me a 1 in the chat if you think Putin is going to be fine with U.S. troops in Ukraine as part of a settlement deal. Give me a 0 otherwise. I mean, just read the room. There doesn't appear to be any appetite to want to stay involved in Ukraine. So if the UK wants to get involved, this is basically what Pete Hegseth said last week in his speech, was that essentially if Europe wants to go to war against Russia, then more power to them, but it's not going to be a NATO operation, meaning that the U.S. will not come to Europe's aid should Europe request it. It's not going to be an Article 5 type of deal. Europe is essentially going to be on their own. And if you look at all of these statistics on the UK's military, the UK has about a standing army of about 100,000 people. How many nukes does it have? Between UK and France, you've got about a handful of nukes. And the rest of Europe is basically unarmed. So yeah, it's essentially all of Europe versus Russia, but keep in mind that Ukraine was the best military one of the best militaries in Europe, given the fact, best militaries to fight Russia, given the fact that they did have this Russian background from the Soviet Union. They understood the Russian ways of war. So they understood their opponents, which made them a dangerous opposition, especially when coupled with all of the money and all of the backing that was being given to them. But here's the thing with alliances like this. You'll also notice that what Europe was giving Ukraine was essentially their old, like World War II, Cold War weaponry. And the problem with alliances is this. You're never going to give your ally who needs support your best weapons, because you're going to keep those weapons for yourself. So Ukraine was essentially getting all of the hand-me-downs from the United States, from Europe, and they may have lasted as long as they did, but could it be because Russia held off in hoping that there could be a peace settlement done should we see a Trump administration? Sir Keir said Europe would have to do more to defend the continent in the face of the generational security challenge Russia poses. He was keen to avoid explaining exactly what he meant by a backstop, but his allies suggest this could involve air support, logistics, and intelligence capabilities. European leaders convened at the Elysee Palace to, pardon my French, to discuss concerns over the Trump administration's decisions to initiate peace talks with Russia, due to start in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday alone. And this is basically, the rest of this article is basically just reiterating what we just went through. And yeah, so at the very end here, it says the former head of the British Army previously estimated such a force would need around 100,000 troops, essentially a peacekeeping force, with the UK contributing about 2/5. So that's essentially 2/5 of the UK military going into Russia to maintain peace. Going into Ukraine to maintain peacekeeping activities. And the UK is already downtrodden as it is. Do you think the UK has the capacity to deploy 40,000 troops? Europe is probably the most economically disheveled out of the United States, even Canada. That's why they're all freaking out right now. That's why that guy went and cried on stage for Zelensky. Because there's nothing they can do about it. All this is talk. And they may be in a state of disbelief. They may be trying to convince themselves that there's still a way to salvage the Ukraine war, but it's most likely going to be deemed a failure. All right, so we're going to segue into our next topic here on gold, but I did an interesting experiment. I asked Grok, which is the AI bot for X, to come up with the case of there being a connection between the UK wanting to send troops into Ukraine, given Keir Starmer's comments, and the recent movement of gold deliveries out of the LBMA, the Bank of England. Notice the common denominator here, which is the UK. Is there a connection? Meaning, here's what Grok told me. So let's see if I can switch screens here. Whoops. Okay. Okay. So I basically told Grok AI, let's make this bigger for you guys, to write me the case, give me a case for there being a connection between the two events, i.e., the UK sending troops into Ukraine and the emptying out of the LBMA. And it basically says this: if the UK were to increase its military involvement in Ukraine, this could be seen as a signal of deeper commitment to counter Russian aggression, potentially escalating tensions. In response, nations or entities might withdraw their gold from the LBMA to hedge against geopolitical risk, including potential economic sanctions or retaliatory actions by Russia. Now, the ongoing narrative is that this is simply deliveries being done ahead of these sanctions, tariffs that are to be imposed on Canada or Mexico potentially in a month or so. And so we have these 25% tariffs that could be slapped on Mexico and Canada, both of which are large gold producers. And so you could see a 25% premium to any gold deliveries, to any gold bought out of either one of those jurisdictions. So people are buying, are asking for delivery from the UK, from the Bank of England into the United States. In preparation for such a move, they're saying we don't just bring it here into the United States because after a month, we could have to pay a 25% premium on it. And basically what Grok has said, that if the UK and Europe as a whole does get into continue a war against Russia in which they're involved solely, it could make it even more difficult to get that gold out of the LBMA. And recent events, the UK has been increasingly vocal about supporting Ukraine, with Starmer explicitly stating readiness to deploy troops for peacekeeping if a peace deal is reached. This commitment was highlighted, blah, 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 during an emergency talks in Paris. So that's what we just finished talking about. The announcement of military involvement can lead to economic uncertainty, prompting investors to move their assets into safe havens like gold. If there is a perception that the UK is about to engage in more directly in conflict, it might drive those with gold stored in London to move to safer, more neutral jurisdictions. So this is what AI is speculating on. So I just thought that was interesting. Do you guys think that there is a connection between what's going on in the UK and the LBMA? Or is this too much of a stretch? Let me know. Let me know in the chat. Let me know in the comment section. This is what I like to kind of think outside the box. Connect dots. If there is a connection, great. If there isn't, then that's fine too. But let's start asking some of these questions. Let's start exploring them. If you have any evidence that can support these claims, let me know in the comments. Let me know in the chat. Really interested to get your take. So let's head back to our news items. And I think what we have next is, okay. So the U.S. Treasury is trying to restock. So now we're going to pivot over to gold. The U.S. Treasury is trying to restock Fort Knox before their upcoming Doge audit. Rumors are flying that Fort Knox gold reserve is empty, having been looted shortly after their last audit in 1974. So this is another theory. Elon Musk threw out the red meat 2 days ago. He even threw out Ron Paul's name as a potential candidate to audit the Federal Reserve and Fort Knox. How much fan service could you give? And so what this account is saying, they're basically speculating that there could be an element of pulling as much gold as possible in to the U.S. before this audit comes into place and unveils that there's nothing behind it. Do you guys buy into this theory? Again, let me know in the comments. And I will be reading the super chats as well as other questions in the chat as well at the end of the show, at the end of this monologue here. So if you have any questions, super chat them, and I'll try to get to each and every one of them, but I'm going to prioritize super chats in case there's too many. So if you want to be sure that your question is answered, go ahead and super chat it. If not, I'll still try to get to it nonetheless. All right, next tweet is from Willem Middlecoop, and he says, physical gold stress, refineries imposing surcharges and suspending production. Metalor, one of the leading Swiss refineries, has recently introduced a per ounce surcharge on all its gold products due to shortages. Another major Swiss refinery, Agor Heraeus, has suspended orders. What's that old saying? Slowly, then all at once. I mean, there is something going on. When you have multiple smoke signals, there's got to be fire. I don't know. I mean, I'm not in the know. I'm not an insider or anything like that. But you keep reading these news headlines. It seems like some people do know. Some people are taking precaution. And a source is from the Bullion Star. Next post is from Zero Hedge. And this is basically a poly market screen grab. Basically looking at the odds of gold missing from Fort Knox. So this is basically saying what the probability of gold missing from Fort Knox. Now you can see here, it started off really high. I guess earlier in the day. Oh, this is like in the span of an hour. So I guess this just went live. Yeah, so I guess it just went live. And it started off at around 20%. Now it's kind of leveled off at 9%. Of course, the volume is really low, $5,700. So I don't know how much credence you can give a statistic like, a finding like that, but it'll be an interesting chart to follow nonetheless. What do you think? If you had to bet $1, would you bet on gold missing? Would you bet on any gold missing? What would be the answer to your question, to this question here for you guys? If you had to bet X amount of dollars, what would you bet? Let me know. And we're going to cap things off by looking at some price action here for gold. And gold currently at 29.07. And it's currently just following this uptrend here, guys. I mean, you have this support line. We've touched it here. You could probably actually extend it all the way out. And the strength of a support line, the significance of a support line is dependent upon how many times you touch it. The more times you touch the support line, the more meaningful it is, the more credence it has. And so since we've started it here back in October of 2023, we've touched it here in February of 2024, we've touched it again in November of 2024, and we've touched it again in recent times here in what is it, December? Yeah, December. So last month. And we've just shot up. And I mean, this thing has no break. Let's look at the candlesticks. Just look at the composition of these green. Like for every red candlestick, it appears you have like 4 or 5 green candlesticks. And so the buyers are overwhelming the sellers. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to juxtapose a time series model, which is basically like a machine learning model, onto this chart, and it'll tell us whether we're in an uptrend that's getting stronger, an uptrend that's getting weaker, a downtrend, neutral, etc. So I'm going to juxtapose this now. Let's see what we get. And these are basically kind of like the margins of error, right? And you have this line that runs through the chart. It's green when we're in an uptrend. It's red when we're in a downtrend. And we are at the start. Granted, we had a little bit of a downtrend from late December into mid-January, but we've been ripping higher since. And the machine learning model is telling us that we are in a moderate uptrend, and the uptrend is strengthening. So we're basically just getting started. And if you look at all these other episodes of green, they've lasted quite a while. The episodes of a downtrend line were very brief. And we've just started a new green uptrend episode. So this is on a daily candlestick. So anytime we start off with this green uptrend, we usually ride it up for, in this case, it went from November 2022 to June 2023. That's over a year and a half. Here was a few months. Back here, it was March 2024 up until we had a brief pause in June 2024. So it's a multi-month thing. In some cases, it was over a year. So yeah, we are in an uptrend, but the model is telling us this is still considered a moderate uptrend. Now let's look at this from a longer term time horizon. Let's look at the weekly candlesticks. And it's telling us we are in a strong uptrend. So from a day-to-day perspective, if I was a betting man, and this is not financial advice, nothing I say in this broadcast is financial advice, but basically what the model says that if you were to bet on the day-to-day, so i.e. if you were to bet tomorrow, there's a higher probability of the gold price going up than not. On the weekly candlesticks, it's the same story. We're in a strong uptrend, it's telling us, which means that the probability of a higher gold close for the week is higher that it's positive. It's higher that the probability is higher that we get a bigger number this week than we did the previous week. Basically what it's saying. And then finally, on a longer term time horizon, on the monthly candlestick, it says we're still in a moderate uptrend. So it's basically saying that the uptrend is strengthening. So it's basically saying that the party is just getting started, even on the monthly. And so what does that tell us? It tells us that it's more likely that the price goes up this month relative to last month than it does not. So gold is clearly has momentum. Granted, it's surged quite a bit already, but the momentum is still on gold's side. Now, let's do the same with silver. Let's go ahead and look at silver. Silver's a different story. Let's go ahead and actually let's head back to gold. I still need to show you guys one more thing. So this is still okay. So we're back at the daily candlestick. Let's close the model out. Let's look at our moving averages. So here's another important indicator. Your yellow line here is your 20-day moving average. Your light orange line here is your 50-day moving average. The one beneath that is your 100-day, and the one beneath that is your 200-day. And each line is at a higher level than the last, which means that gold is moving at an accelerating rate. When your 20-day moving average is higher than your 50-day moving average, which is higher than your 100-day moving average, etc., that means we're accelerating in the near term. So we want to see gold maintain itself above these moving averages. See, right now, the price action has it above all of these moving average lines. So that's another bullish indicator on top of what we just viewed with our machine learning model. So let's go ahead and pivot over to silver. Silver, kind of a different story, but let's go ahead and take a look at it. It is not at an all-time high like gold is, but it is it's close to a local high. But we're currently priced at 32.74. But here's the thing with silver. I mean, take a look at this red candlestick here. This basically meant that the price went all the way up to $34.25 and then got slammed down by the sellers. Back down to 32.86. Now, that is not a bullish sign. That's actually a bearish sign. The fact that you think of it psychologically, that's basically telling you we got up to this high, but it was slammed down. It was rejected. If you're a guy, it's like being rejected by a hot girl when you go up, ask them out for a date. What does that do to your self-esteem? But that candlestick right there is not a good indicator. But then conversely, before that candlestick, you had a hammer pattern here on the 11th where the price went all the way down to 31.68, but then closed out. The buyers were able to push it back up to 32.32. So that's actually a bullish indicator. But given that this is the most recent candlestick, this holds more weight. So this could spell some mixed signals when it comes to silver. You're seeing some mixed signals. And again, But what's interesting is that the yellow line, which is your 20-day moving average, just crossed over your 50-day moving average line, which means you're starting to get more momentum in the near term. And this is what you see when you're starting an uptrend. So could we be getting ready for a move up in silver? In any case, we're still above each of these moving averages. We're above the 20-day, the 50-day, 100-day, and 200-day. And so silver, gold, if I had to choose, I'm slightly more bullish. I'm not slightly, but I am more bullish on gold. Again, not financial advice, just reading the tea leaves here. But let's go ahead and apply our model to it. Let's close out our moving averages. Let's see what our machine learning model has to say. And it basically says there is no trend. But we're at the early stages of an uptrend forming. So our model is telling us that we are incubating an uptrend. Could this be the incubation period of that uptrend? Again, silver, a lot more difficult to tell. Similarly, if you were to make a call for the next day as to whether or not you go long or not on silver, it's sort of neutral. It's kind of 50-50, maybe 55-45 on the side of that this day closes out higher than the next day, but it's very close. It's kind of a coin toss, no pun intended. Let's look at the longer time horizon. Let's look at a 1 week time horizon. And it says we're in a moderate uptrend, but the uptrend is weakening. So again, things are kind of slowing down on the silver side, but on the day-to-day, it looks like we're kind of on the cusp. The weekly candlesticks say we're weakening in our uptrend. And then finally, our monthly candlesticks, let's see what they have to say. It says that we're in a weak uptrend, but the uptrend is strengthening. So on a month-to-month basis, if you were to hold silver looking out on a monthly basis, this model would tell us that you would be more likely to see movement to the upside versus the downside. But again, silver is a little bit more tight. So I think that's all I got for the monologue. I'd like to encourage you guys to check out our good sponsors and our good friends over at ITM Trading. For all of your gold and silver stacking needs, go ahead and set up a strategy call. It's completely free. You have nothing to lose. There's no commitment necessary. At the very minimum, you're just going to get a free strategy call, free consultation call. So why not just take it? And if you like the prices, you can buy from them. If you don't like the prices, if you have a dealer that has better prices out there, then you can just go with them. But at the very minimum, at least you get like a free strategy call. And it behooves you not to take advantage of any opportunity for intel and just getting to know the gold market more so and more so, especially as it relates to your personal needs. So I have the link to the call down below in the description. You could also call the number right here as well. So that's it for the monologue. Let's go ahead and read our chat here in a second. Let's see what we got here. All right, I'm going to start off with our super chat. Okay, so the first super chat from A1, and it says, regardless of how corrupt Ukraine is, as if Russia isn't, or the U.S., it's insane to me that Ukraine isn't represented at these talks and they aren't public. Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for the super chat, or I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. But again, this goes back to who is the real stakeholder in all of this. Russia does not view Ukraine or Zelensky, for better or for worse, as the primary mover and shaker of this war. It seems like they kind of view them as a puppet. And from their perspective, they don't want to negotiate with the puppet. They want to go straight to the source and negotiate with the United States. And for sure, Russia is heavily corrupt, as is the United States. We live in an imperfect world, but I think that's what they're seeing over there. And that's the rationale behind Ukraine being left out of these talks. Let's see. Anything else? Let's go ahead and see what we got here. Any question? Ken Solomon says Zelensky locked himself out of negotiations and openly before a joint session of Congress handed his country over to Uncle Sam. Dave Murray says it's more bank than money. Money is like fire or electricity. Depends on what you do with it. Let's see. Did you guys leave any questions? Dave Murray also says Reuters received $127 million from USAID to push propaganda. Yeah, as did a bunch of other people. A also said, well, if Zelensky isn't considered legitimate a leader to Ukraine, then who is? Not having representation at these talks is preposterous. Yeah. So here's the rationale for Putin, and it kind of goes back to the cessation of elections in Ukraine. We haven't had an election in Ukraine in over since the war started. Even though there was scheduled to be an election, Zelensky canceled elections, and so what the Russians said was that Zelensky was no longer a legitimate leader or legitimate elected leader of Ukraine. But yeah, it's extremely tragic what's happened in Ukraine, especially to the people there. Those millions of deaths. Certainly didn't have to be this way. But thank you for the super chat, my friend. All right, let's see what else we got here. Dave Murray also says, not a joke, UK's destruction by its own government is 100% planned, prepared, tons of money went into it, tons of energy, decades of preparations, people thinking it's incompetence or drinking Kool-Aid. Do you guys think it's planned? Brian says there was the Minsk agreements, NATO not to extend the borders of Russia. That was a bluff on NATO's part. Yeah, it seems like it. Let's see. Yeah, some of these I can't read out loud on YouTube, guys. Sergio says, this a new format, Danny? Potentially. It could be a new format. Yeah, let me know what you guys thought of this. Did you guys enjoy this live monologue? If you guys enjoyed it, I might do this more often, maybe like a nightly news type of thing where we just kind of go through the news and we can take super chats and questions at the end of the show. Yeah, so this could be like another thing on top of the interviews that I do. If you guys got value out of it, let me know. If you enjoyed it, let me know in the chat if you enjoyed it. If you're watching the recorded version of this, let me know in the comments section. Do you want to see more of this? Okay, let's see what else we have here. Article 5 is not mandatory, says one new man. Lee James says 1,000 British soldiers leaving army every month. Steve G says the EU is finished. Brian says there's always that mysterious blip on a Friday afternoon, but gold always goes back to its upward trajectory. I think, yeah, so this is with respect to the price charts that we looked at. Yeah, I mean, that candlestick was wild. That silver candlestick, come on. All right. Anna Weirs. Anna, did I pronounce your last name correctly? I know you. I see you in the comments all the time. Super appreciative of you sticking through the content here. He says good metaphors. 2 adults deciding what to do with a child. Thanks, Anna. Bella Crinkle says, let's look at the euro versus dollar. More telling of the geopolitical future. Yes. Yes. Europe is extremely fragile right now. Jake Shockley says, left Afghanistan 6 months before Ukraine, bailing on Ukraine so they can finally do Iran while the dollar is still reserve currency, then epic economic crash. That's very interesting, Jake. Yeah, there is some semblance of the Afghanistan pullout and this potential pullout in Ukraine. If we are going to see a ramp up in escalations with Iran, then U.S. resources can't be split between Ukraine and Iran, or Russia and Iran. From a planning perspective, you'd want all of that consolidated into that war with Iran, if that is indeed the plan. So yeah, very interesting thought here. Could that be it? Could that be the reason behind the closure of the Ukraine war? Is it simply like a logistical issue? They can't be fighting 2 wars at once. They had to choose between the 2. And the Trump administration would most likely choose fighting Iran over fighting Russia. Possibly. It's just speculation. Let me know what you guys think. When does silver hit 420, says Alan Satoshi Greenspan. Hey, you never know. Do you believe we are in a silent depression, says Alan Satoshi Greenspan? You know what? That could very well be the case, because in the Great Depression, you had like all these bread lines. The poverty was visible. Now you've got food stamps. You've got all sorts of assistance and aid to low-income individuals and families. So it's more unseen today versus where it was in the 1920s. So we could very well be in a recession, or I don't know if we could call it a depression, but it could very well be kind of like this cloaked, this stealthy or silent recession. And I think that is it. All right, guys, if you enjoyed this broadcast, give me a like. If you're not a subscriber yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Let's get this channel moving on the algorithm. It does help boost this content. And it's a free way to support me. And check us out on Substack, capitalcosm.substack.com, where you get all my interviews before the YouTube audience does, and they will be ad-free and uncensored for the ones that warrant it. And yeah, let me know what you thought of this format. If you enjoyed this format, drop me a comment down below, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Help support me in whichever way you can. Check out our partners over at ITM Trading. Great cast of characters over there. Again, you have nothing to lose. It's free. You may as well just get like a second opinion on your gold and silver portfolio. Link to that is down below. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Let's see if we do this again. Until next time. Bye, y'all.